You ever just stop and think about how we actually see? I mean, you open your eyes and boom, there's the world. It feels so automatic.
It really does. But what's going on, behind the scenes in our brains is incredibly complex.
Right. And today we're diving into something really fundamental to that whole process, something maybe a bit unexpected.
Exactly. We're talking about oriented edges, simple lines, basically.
Lines. Like lines are the secret?
In a way, yeah. Or at least understanding how our brain detects them was this huge breakthrough in neuroscience. That's our focus, how this discovery happened and why it's so important, even now.
Okay, so where do we start? How far back does this idea go?
Well, let's set the stage way, way back. Think about the Cambrian explosion about, 540 million years ago?
Ah, yeah, the time when life on Earth suddenly got really diverse, really
Well,
fast.
exactly. And there's this compelling theory by Andrew Parker that a key driver for that explosion was the evolution of the eye, even a very basic one, like in early trilobites.
So the ability to see changed everything,
Pretty much. Suddenly you have creatures that can hunt visually.
which means other creatures needed to get better at hiding or defending themselves.
Precisely. It kicks off this massive biological arms race. Predator-prey dynamics really take off.
All because of sight. So vision was critical right from the get-go for, well, survival.
Absolutely fundamental. Now, let's jump forward quite a bit to the mid-20th century. This is where the story of how our brains process vision really takes a leap.
And this involves some famous names, right? Hubble and Wiesel.
That's them, David Hubble and Torsten Beisel. They did this groundbreaking work involving experiments with cats.
Right, I've heard about this. They used microelectrodes, these tiny sensors.
Yeah, incredibly fine electrodes placed in the primary visual cortex.
Okay, hang on. Primary visual cortex is like the first stop in the brain for information coming from the eye.
Exactly, the initial processing hub in the cortex. And their initial thought, or maybe the general assumption, was that neurons there would, fire strongly when shown complex images.
Like, show the cat a picture of a fish, and the fish neuron lights up. Something like that.
Sort of, yeah. That was the kind of thinking. But it wasn't what they found.
Oh. So what happened?
Well, many neurons just didn't respond much to these kinds of complex pictures. They were surprisingly quiet.
Huh. So where did the breakthrough come from?
Get this. It was almost accidental. They were using a projector, manually putting in slides.
Okay. Like old school slide projector.
Right. And they started noticing that certain neurons fired like crazy, not really at the image on the slide, but when the edge of the slide moved across the screen as they were changing it, that moving line, that edge, was the trigger.
Wow. So not the picture, but the boundary, the line itself.
Exactly. That observation changed everything. It led them to systematically test simple shapes, like bars of light.
And what did they find when they did that?
They showed these bars at different angles, different orientations, and they discovered something amazing about how this part of the brain is organized. The neurons weren't just randomly responding. They found that neurons were grouped together in columns.
Columns of brain cells.
Yeah, and all the neurons within a particular column would respond most strongly to a line or an edge oriented at one specific angle.
Seriously. So like one column is all about vertical lines, the next one is maybe 45 degrees, the next horizontal.
That's basically it. A highly specific, organized system for detecting line orientation right at the first stage of cortical processing.
That's incredible. So the brain isn't trying to see the whole fish right away. It's starting much simpler.
Much simpler. It's breaking the visual scene down into these fundamental components, these oriented edges. It's like, step one, find all the lines and their angles.
And then figure out what they make.
Exactly. You build up complexity from these simple detected features. It was a completely different way of thinking about how vision starts.
That really is an aha moment. It just reframes the whole problem.
Absolutely. And it showed how sophisticated processing could emerge from, relatively simple initial steps. This work was so foundational, it earned them the Nobel Prize in 1981.
So just to really nail this down, why is detecting these oriented edges first so crucial? What's the big advantage?
Well, think about it. Almost everything you see, every object, has shape, has boundaries.
Right. Defined by lines and curves, edges where light changes.
Exactly. Those edges are the basic structure of the visual world. By detecting those, first the orientation, the location, the brain gets the fundamental building blocks it needs.
Okay, so it's like learning the alphabet before you can read words or sentences.
That's a great analogy. The brain learns this alphabet of oriented lines, and then it can start combining them to recognize shapes, textures, objects, everything. It's incredibly efficient.
So this discovery wasn't just about biology then. It had ripples.
Oh, huge ripples. It didn't just change neuroscience, it deeply influenced the early days of artificial intelligence, especially computer vision.
How so? People tried to build machines that work the same way.
Well, yeah. Think about Larry Roberts' work back in 1963, his PhD thesis. It was called Block World.
Block world sounds simple.
The goal was simple. Get a computer to recognize simple 3D shapes, like blocks, regardless of lighting or viewpoint. But how he approached it was key.
Let me guess edges.
You got it. He was directly inspired by Hubel and Wiesel's findings, even though their work was still quite new. His program focused specifically on extracting the edges from the image first.
So find the lines, then figure out the block. Same principle.
Exactly the same principle. Identify the edges and their junctions to infer the 3D structure. It sounds basic now, maybe, but it was a foundational step in getting computers to see.
And does this idea, this edge-first approach, still show up today? Like in modern AI?
Absolutely. It's a core concept, especially in deep learning models used for vision, like convolutional neural networks or CNNs.
Ah, CNNs. Those are everywhere now. In image recognition, self-driving cars.
Right. And if you look at how they work, especially in the very first layers of the network,
What do they do?
they learn to detect simple features. And guess what some of the most basic features they learn are?
Oriented edges.
Oriented edges, exactly. Lines at different angles, corners, simple textures. It mirrors the Hubel and Wiesel findings remarkably well.
So the way we build our most advanced artificial vision systems actually mimics the first step our own brains take.
In a very real sense, yes. Of course, the history is a bit more complex. You had precursors like Fukushima's neocognitron, then Jan LeCun's work really pushing CNNs forward for things like reading handwritten digits.
Sure, lots of development.
But that fundamental idea, start with simple features like edges and build up complexity, is still right there at the heart of why these networks are so successful. It's built on that biological insight.
Wow. So recapping this whole journey, vision becomes evolutionarily critical incredibly early on.
Driven by the simple ability to detect light and eventually shapes.
Then, much later, Hubel and Wiesel discover our brains start processing vision by finding simple oriented edges in the primary visual cortex,
A Nobel Prize-winning insight showing complexity built from simple units.
which then inspires early computer vision efforts, like Block World,
Trying to engineer that same edge detection principle.
and ultimately influences the architecture of modern deep learning, the CNNs that power so much AI today.
Yeah, the legacy is really clear. That initial biological discovery about how we see laid groundwork for how we build machines that see.
The core idea is just starting simple. The brain doesn't grab the whole picture at once. It starts with lines.
It starts with lines. That's the fundamental takeaway. Complex perception built layer by layer from very basic elements.
It really makes you look at the world differently, knowing that's the first step happening constantly in your head.
It does. And maybe it makes you wonder, what else works like that?
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. If our incredibly rich visual experience starts with something as basic as detecting oriented lines, where else might we find really complex systems or sophisticated understanding that are actually built up from surprisingly simple rules or components?
Oh, like in other areas of biology or technology, or even, I don't know, social structures.
Exactly. It's a thought to leave you with. Keep an eye out for those simple building blocks. You might be surprised where they turn up as the foundation for complexity.